At this point in time, there's been 5 randomized placebo-controlled trials that do not show any benefit to hydroxychloroquine. So at this point in time, we don't recommend that as a treatment. There's no evidence to show that it is. I think most physicians and prescribers are evidence-based, and they're not influenced by whatever is on Twitter or anything else. And the evidence just doesn't show that hydroxychloroquine is effective right now. I think we need to move on from that and talk about what is effective.
Whoa! Whoa! Mike Barnacle, who would have ever seen that coming? Member of White House Coronavirus Task Force, Admiral Brett Garrar says hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. This is like the ending of The Sixth Sense. I never saw that. The ring's rolling around on the floor, and I'm trying to figure out what's happening. Same thing here. He's saying hydroxychloroquine. You never saw Sixth Sense, did you? Okay, maybe I need to do this with Lemire. But he says what people have been saying since March, I think, and that is hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. And the president just keeps coming back to it. I'd love to follow the money. I just don't know where that money goes, why Donald Trump keeps pushing this medical scam.
You know, in this administration, that statement yesterday by the Admiral qualifies for a chapter in Profiles in Courage. You wonder today whether he'll be forced to retire. You wonder what will happen to his career, because he spoke the truth. And that is the truth. I mean, this is a quackery theory, and yet it's been carried on for months and months and months, led by who else? The President of the United States. Absolutely amazing. Hydrochloroquine, no good. No good. Forget it. Move on.
I keep going through Anne Applebaum's The Twilight of Democracy, and you look at that book, and what you see in there is, people warning long ago about how cranks and crackpots are chosen to fill regimes because people who tell the truth get pushed aside. That's what's happened in this regime. Here, somebody tells the truth, like Dr. Fauci told the truth, and they get attacked by Donald Trump's political hacks. We'll see if the Oppo dump comes on him this afternoon like it did on Dr. Fauci, because what's Dr. Fauci doing? He's telling the truth, and would-be autocrats hate when people on their staff tell the truth. We're going to get to our doctors in a minute, but first, really quickly, I want to talk about that poll we showed you last block out of North Carolina and another from Georgia. The latest CBS News YouGov poll shows Joe Biden up 4 points in North Carolina, 48% to Donald Trump's 44%. While in Georgia, a state that seems like it's been tied for months, Joe Biden is up 46 to 45%, falling within the margins, the poll's margin of error. And back to North Carolina for a moment, where it is worth noting that Tom Tillis is trailing Democratic challenger Cal Cunningham by 9, count them, 9 points. Jason, it's going to be so hard for Tom Tillis to come back and win that race. He's been very unpopular in the state of North Carolina. He's been fighting approval ratings in the low 30s for some time. He tried to get a little Trumpier, and that only drove his numbers down even more in North Carolina. But you look at North Carolina, you look at the fact that Georgia is still tied. I'm told that that's the first time a Democrat's been tied in a poll in Georgia since 1992 when REM released Automatic for the People. I don't know exactly who researched that, but God bless them for doing it. And you look at Texas, where we have another outbreak in Houston, testing high, 20% high positivity rate in Houston, Texas. Every Texas poll has seemed to be within the margin of error, except for a Dallas Morning News poll last month that showed Joe Biden up by 5 points. So here you have Donald Trump, who believed he was going to be fighting in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Florida. Now fighting in Arizona, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina for his very life. He can't lose one of those. He can't lose one of those. They've already given up on Michigan. That makes their position, at least right now in early August, all the more dire.
these SEC, ACC states, he can't lose them, right? And the problem is now it's moving to the Sun Belt. And Joe, what's really important to remember is if you dig into these numbers, the biggest strike against President Trump has been people believe that Joe Biden will handle the coronavirus better than Trump has. And that goes back to what we have been talking about all along, that the president's grotesque mismanagement of these issues and his acolytes in North Carolina, his acolytes in Georgia, his acolytes in Arizona have gone down with him. And now it's too late to turn this car around. Look, I've always had my doubts. We've always had our doubts going back to 2018. Brian Kemp is a master at suppressing the vote and cheating. And I suspect there will be some difficulties in Georgia on Election Day. But this is not a state that Republicans thought they were going to have to spend any money. This is not a state that Republicans thought they were going to have to go to do any work in. And if you look at the numbers right now in North Carolina with a 9-point lead for Cunningham and Roy Cooper is running away with that state, that might be enough to drag Joe Biden over the line in these states. And if you start having situations where Democratic governors and Democratic Senate candidates are really popular, that may push the vote over. You can't suppress the vote everywhere and not run the risk of harming your own chances. And that's what Donald Trump has done. And that's what he's facing in these southern states.
Yeah, I mean, again, Jonathan, you wrote a piece about it, and we've been talking about it for some time. Michigan's pretty much off the board right now for the Trump team. They know it's going to be next to impossible for them to win that. I look at Pennsylvania, and when I see polls that say it's 2 or 3 points, I don't believe those polls any more than I believe the polls that say it's 12 or 13 points in Florida. I think Florida remains close, North Carolina remains close, Arizona remains close. But, yeah, Texas and Georgia, perhaps those 2 states will remain close. But I look at a state like Pennsylvania, again, in the Philly suburbs, speaking of the Sixth Sense, in the Philly suburbs, or maybe that was Signs. Forgive me. I'm confusing my movies now. But you look at the Philly suburbs. Donald Trump's going to get hammered in the Philly suburbs. You look at Philadelphia proper, he's going to lose badly there. You look at Scranton, he's going to do far worse in Scranton than any Republican's done in Scranton in quite some time because Joe Biden's from the Scranton area. Philadelphia people saw Joe Biden as a Delaware senator on Philly newscasts. And I suspect Biden will do better even in the Pittsburgh suburbs than Hillary Clinton did. So you start looking at Michigan being out of reach, Pennsylvania being an uphill climb. You got a position where Donald Trump's going to have to run the board on all of these states that are now either toss-ups or leaning in Biden's direction. What do they do with their new strategy? Where do they aim their campaign dollars? Because you can't ignore Texas now. You can't ignore Georgia. You can't ignore North Carolina. You can't ignore Florida. You can't ignore Arizona.
Well, Joe, first, the 2 pop culture notes. I believe several of M. Night's movies are set in the Philadelphia area. And I think Life's Rich Pageant is R.E.M's best album, but Automatic for the People, undeniably a classic. The map and the path is narrow for...
I've got to stop you. I just can't let that go by. If you're not going to pick Murmur, then you got to go with Fables. The Reconstruction.
The Murmur might be the greatest debut album of any American band in 50-odd years. I completely agree. Okay. I'm a little partial to Life's Rich Pageant, but the entirety of the R.E.M. canon is hard to assail. They're one of the greats.
All right.
Good. Glad we're on the same page here, Joe. In terms of the map, the president's team, they know this, and I think that we've talked about Michigan being all but gone. Pennsylvania is one that's interesting. The Philadelphia Inquirer reported last week how Republicans have actually had a huge advantage in voter registration there in the last 4 years. That overall, Dems are still up by a smidge, but it's gotten close, and I think there's a lot of sense in the political world that Pennsylvania is a state that might even be trending Republican in some ways. But this year, with the Democrats landing on Joe Biden as their candidate, they feel good about that. And the Democrat and the president's team knows they've got an uphill climb there. That though Pennsylvania, of course, reliably Democrat for decades, they now think that is a true battleground going forward. But advantage Dems at this moment. I think the president's travel also indicates where there's some concern. I was with him when he had to go to Texas last week. There's talk of a stop in Ohio this week. These are states that 4, 5, 6 months ago, the Trump camp thought they had all but put in the bag. That is no longer the case. We can certainly put Georgia in that category, too. And now they have to play a lot of defense. And that, of course, though the president certainly has not had trouble raising money, there is a finite number of resources. You can only allocate your campaign's money and your candidate's time, maybe your most precious asset, in so many places. Yep. And if they have to be in Texas, if they have to be in Ohio, that takes away from the time they can be in Florida, a state they cannot win without, as well as Wisconsin and some of the other upper Midwest states. And let's recall also the path of the virus. Right now, for weeks now, it has wreaked havoc in places like Florida, Texas, Arizona, California. It's still bad there. But the White House itself says they're monitoring with worry increasing hotspots in places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio. And if those states start really suffering as well, that, of course, is only going to hurt the president's political chances further.
It really will, because, again, the worse the pandemic is, the more people are going to be focusing on those comments that it's just one person coming in from China and it's going away. It's 15 people coming in and we're going to be perfectly fine. Nothing to worry about. I'm not worried. All the things that Donald Trump said. Casey, so you can only, I know the president raised a lot of money. He has wasted so much money of his donors' money. You think of all the millions and millions of dollars they spent, and he just keeps falling further and further behind. And now, instead of 6 months ago, they thought we're going to laser focus on Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Florida, and hold down all the other states that we won last time, and we'll be in great shape. Now, I'm just writing down this list, talking to Jonathan. They're tied in Texas. They're tied in Georgia. They're behind in North Carolina. They're behind in Arizona. They're behind in Florida. They're tied in Ohio. Those are 6 states that Donald Trump thought he had in the bag, that the campaign thought they had in the bag 6 months ago. And those are huge states: Texas, Ohio, Florida. I mean, they're going to have to spend a ton of money to stay competitive there.
Yeah, huge states, expensive media markets, and frankly, a limited arsenal of options for how to try and compete there. I mean, the president has lost what was his #1 campaign tool in 2016, and that was those massive rallies that generated all kinds of free media coverage for him that did not require him to spend any campaign money. So, yeah, that's definitely a problem. But I want to go back, as you were ticking through that list of people who suddenly have their Senate seats at risk because this president has mishandled the virus. And I covered all of these Senate races in 2014. The 2014 guys are the ones who are up for re-election. Let's just remember that a lot of them won their seats attacking then President Obama's handling of the Ebola virus, a virus that never spread in the United States, a virus that, we treated a handful of people here on American soil who had come in from Africa where they were fighting that epidemic. People like Tom Tillis spent that campaign attacking their Democratic opponents over the president's handling of that. And now they've got to turn around and try to defend what this president has done with this virus. I just think it's worth pointing out and considering that as we cover all of these races across the country.
Yeah, with 150,000 Americans now dead, Tom Tillis is going to have a hard time, obviously, defending what the president's done and the fact that he sat quietly by while the president has made one mistake after another. Still ahead, new reporting that some health experts are worried